Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation I had with John. Some of you are new around here, so we've decided to rebroadcast some of our episodes. If you've been curious as to why we started this podcast, then settle in for a conversation to hear John's F1 origin story and the rationale for the Two Guys, a Girl, and F1 podcast. I'm sure you'll walk away appreciating John. I know I do. But before we get to that conversation, I need to take a moment to ask, have you subscribed to or followed the show on your favorite podcast app? Have you shared the show with your fellow F1 fans? If not, can you take a moment to do so now? For an indie podcast like us, that's how we grow. You taking these small actions. And we are growing, and it's because of you. The guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. John, I am really excited for this conversation we're about to have because I think your backstory as to why you are a Formula One fan, I know just highlights, but I think to the audience especially, it would be great for them to hear your story of how you became an F1 fan. I'm hoping that we can just take our time and enjoy a nice conversation about what brought you to decide that we should do this podcast. So let me start firsthand and ask, F1 has historically been a sport in Europe, but you're an American. Why F1? How did you get connected?
When I was a kid, 15, 16 years old, I'd go to the grocery store with my mom. And while she was shopping, I would go to the magazine section, and I was beginning to get interested in cars, being a male at 15, 16 in the United States of America and in the muscle car era. And in the back of Road and Track magazine, there was a periodic report on this thing that I had never, ever heard of before called Formula One. And Rob Walker was the journalist. He had also been a driver, but he was a wealthy British gentleman driver. And he was, if I'm not mistaken, he was injured in an accident, and his wife said, no more of that. So he became a team owner, a private team owner, which was possible back in the day. And part of the way that he supported the team was through his journalism. And he would report on the Formula One races. And it just always, the visual picture that he painted with his words was so captivating. It was color and sound and the racing and the people and the romance and the glitz and all of that of it. And I just thought, that's really interesting. So I kept getting more and more interested and trying to find out more and more about Formula One and automobile racing. And the cars were fantastic. They didn't have fenders. They were these little cylinders that the driver sat in. You could see him, and you could see him steering and turning, and it was just fascinating and so exciting to watch. And so that was how I got initially interested in Formula One in particular, was through the magazine section at the Minyard's grocery store.
I love it. I mean, maybe that's a good plug for Road and Track. They need to realize how many issues that you've got that now it's brought you to this point. So then let me ask you, take me back to one of the races that you've attended, because I'm assuming it didn't just stay in the Road and Track world. You actually went to races.
Yeah, well, there was a U.S. Grand Prix then, but it was in upstate New York. So I didn't ever go to a Grand Prix in those early days, but I was desperate. I had to see some of this. And so the Sports Car Club of America had races in the Dallas area. There was actually, let's see, what was it called? Green Valley Raceway. And so I went to a race there, and man, the machinery was very interesting. It was different, not just Formula One cars, formula cars, but sports racers and sedans and all this kind of thing. And I was just hooked. And then I went to a race at Dallas Motor Speedway, which was a relatively new track at that time out in Louisville, Texas. And watched a spectacular race, just amateur race, but it was just fantastic. And And then one other race early on was a race I went to, and there was a guy from Kansas racing, and I kind of struck up a conversation with him because I was so fascinated in trying to figure out, how you could get into this and what it would be like and all that. And he actually asked me some questions about the local weather to kind of prepare for the race. So I thought, well, this might be something I could get involved in. So that's how those were the first, sort of three experiences of going to a race.
Interesting. So you were definitely one of the cool kids before it was cool to be cool.
I certainly thought I was, but no, I wasn't very cool at all.
I mean, that, especially when there are other motorsport options for Americans, and especially in the season, the era you're talking about, I find it fascinating how you had to you didn't have the internet and things like that to get you connected. You had to go there, you had to experience it. And do you think that that's one of the many things that attracted you to the sport, was the experience of the race, like being there, the sights, the sound, the smell? It's just not one thing.
Yeah, it's a lot of things. I kind of like esoteric things, like I like backgammon. Most people play checkers. I like, I'm now involved in gliding and soaring in sailplanes. So yeah, I like things that are a little different and not just something that everybody can do, but something that's a little offbeat maybe. Yeah, so that's probably true.
I like that. Well, I especially admire that because I want to have more of that in my life, not to go with the flow, but be willing to be a little different. So what's it been like to be a longtime fan when, it hasn't been as notable with all the other racing options here in the US? Do you find yourself like explaining to people what in the world Formula One is, and they're kind of looking at you like, why?
Yeah, in 1982, I went to my wife sent me as a birthday present to the Long Beach Grand Prix, and I was a big fan of Gilles Villeneuve. And my ticket happened to be in the bleachers, sitting right above the Ferrari pits where Gilles was pitted, and man, it was just unbelievable to see this guy who I just admired so much. And I would go walk around the track while they were practicing, and he in particular would drive, and there was this sequence of turns that were sort of 90-degree turns, and left hand 90-degree uphill, right hand 90-degree onto the straight. And the course is a street course and was outlined by Armco barriers, the steel barriers. Mm-hmm. And he would exit this bottom turn and head uphill to this second turn. And it was about a 45-degree angle across the track. And he headed right straight for that Armco. And every single time, and I was just remember being so fascinated by this, every single time he got to within a couple of inches of the Armco, he just flicked the steering wheel to the right and made that turn every single time. And I decided, and one of my friends, later friends, was a former Formula One team owner. And he characterized it best when I told him my story later. And when I met him, he said, "You just couldn't stand being behind the fence. You had to get out there and see what it was like." And that's true. That became the impetus for my going to a driving school. I went to a driving school in France. The reason I went there were driving schools here in America that were available, but this one had produced a bunch of F1 drivers, 28 or 30 at that time. And I figured, well, I may as well go there as go anywhere else. And so I did, and I was one of 18 guys, and I'd never driven a race car. And it was a 4-day course, and all these other guys had driven race cars. They had driving suits and their own helmets and all this kind of stuff. And I was driving in blue jeans and tennis shoes and wearing one of their helmets and one of the school's helmets. at the end of the 4 days, I mean, I'm watching these guys and I'm doing what the teacher tells us and learning and learning and learning. And it's, moving out of watching this to being in the seat driving. And at the end of the 4 days, I was actually the fastest of the 18.
Wow.
And yeah, so they invited me back. I was too old by that time to win the coveted Pilot Elf prize, but I'd qualified, so they invited me back. And eventually, when I went back for the advanced course and final and the competition, they offered me a half subsidized ride, but I had 3 kids and couldn't raise the relatively now small amount of money, but it just wasn't possible then. So I came back and decided to start racing here, and did.
I love that story. I love how you went after it. And especially when you talk about the jeans and the helmet, like I'm imagining all the people are going, who's this guy? They haven't seen this before, and knocking their socks off like you did. Is there something that if you a different choice, a different way it could have gone, do you ever wonder? Or are you pleased with where things are and how you've been able to still continue being a part of the sport in a different way?
Well, you always think that you could do more and be better. But I think honestly that had I gone over there, I might have made it further up the food chain. I don't think I would have made it to Formula One, simply because I think that I was probably a little bit too old. I was probably a little bit too responsible because I did have kids by that time. And of course, Gilles Villeneuve had kids, and I thought I could do it too. But from a realistic point of view, it would have been very tough because it would have been raising money. It just would have been very hard. So I'm pretty pleased. I came back. I did pretty well in the amateur racing that I did, and raced in the 24 Hours of Daytona was my last real race, and we were running very strongly against professional factory supported teams until one of the drivers made a big mistake and put us out of the race.
So I think one of the things that I've always admired about you, and especially as my appreciation for F1 really started because of the conversations you and I had, and being exposed to your family who loves it, obviously, I think comes from your love for the sport, is the way that you approach the sport, not only from the enthusiasm, but also the technical and the knowledge. And that's when we decided to have this podcast. I was like, I feel like I get the best seat in the whole, anybody listening to this conversation, because it's all the questions and conversations I feel like new people like me would love to know, and to have someone like you who has seen and been a part of it from your perspective as an American, especially, and the decisions that led you to where you are today. I think you have a very unique perspective. You've seen the sport evolve, I think. Would you agree?
Oh yeah, you bet. We've gone from cars they just started putting wings on the cars when I came into it. They had just moved to monocoque chassis made out of aluminum. And from that period, you went into the turbocharged era, and the cars went from, say, 450 or 500 horsepower to 1,100 horsepower at one point. Ground effects, you had the whole Colin Chapman ground effects thing, and then you moved on into the carbon fiber tub eras, and big moves into safety for the drivers, and driver protest. We're not going to drive in this race until y'all fix thing. And back then, I mean, the safety was, we would lose several drivers a year, it seemed. And that may have been one of the things that kind of drew me to it. Why would somebody do something that's so dangerous? But now it's much safer. You can still get killed, you can still get hurt, but much, much safer than it was in those days. So the evolution has been very interesting. The rules have changed quite a bit. It's gotten very expensive, of course. Used to private teams, people, who just loved the sport could actually compete. And in the Cosworth era, they even had a chance of winning.
Mm.
It was possible.
Mm-hmm. But that's definitely not the case.
No way now.
No way now. It seems it seems like the road there is one, and especially I think you alluded to it, it's a decision you have to make fairly early. And that I think is unlike other sports that I'm not a big sports enthusiast, as you know. This is really the only thing that I care to watch. In other sports, you don't have such an outlay at the front end, and the age of consent, I think, because you have a vehicle, I think also makes a difference in my mind, that how the people around you can affect your decision making. In that, I think also comes when I listen to you, I think about that, like all the different factors, that unlike other sports where maybe you can make that decision in middle school or high school, and it's not going to change your direction. But it seems like, as I've delved in more into the world of Formula One, you got to make that almost before elementary school. It feels like, looking at some of the kids that are karting. What do you think about people who just think it's about fast cars? It's more than that. I think we can both agree.
Oh,
but
absolutely.
How do we answer that for other people?
Well, that's an interesting question, and I don't know exactly how you answer it for other people. It is fast cars. I mean, they're in Miami this weekend. They were doing almost 200 miles an hour down the straight. That's in a pretty short distance that they get up to that. So it is about fast cars, but it's not just about fast cars. Some of the things that are real interesting about it are the technology. The technology is incredible. The computers that are used, the data that's evaluated, the politics of it, the international nature of it, all of those things come together in ways that are just not like any other sport. And that probably is something that the average person who's really just tuning into Formula One doesn't really get. They don't see the politics. They don't see the Machiavellian moves by the drivers that are so interesting, fascinating, and incredible, and the psychological games, the mind games that the drivers, they have to play. They have to be very adept at mental gymnastics and mind games, because it's all about, first of all, you got to beat your teammate, and then you got to beat everybody else. But if you don't beat your teammate, you got trouble.
Right. I think that's so good. Yeah. Well, so let me ask you then, looking back over the eras that you've been a fan, and you're looking at things like all the different things of the technology and the politics, and the competition, and then the cars, because you discussed like the different types of cars that you've seen. Is there a certain era of racing that you wished we could go back to, or are you pleased with where you find F1 today?
Well, I love the technology, and I love what the cars, are capable of now. But they have power steering, they have power brakes, they've got computer management of every Tom, Dick, and Harry thing in the world. They got people talking in there, telling them exactly what else is going on. And, that's part of it. And, it's entertaining, and it's just the way that it's evolved. But I really like the 70s and 80s, the late 70s and early 80s. And when the driver really, he'd come around and they'd hang a pit board out and tell him whether he was plus or minus, the next guy, and how far, and what lap he's on, for crying out loud, because he didn't have a data acquisition system in there. And the driver had to, they didn't have power steering, and they had these huge wheels on there and big brakes, and you really had to have upper body strength. and not to diminish anything at all about the guys now, because the G forces that they're carrying in the corners are huge, and so they do have to have real strong upper body and strong necks. But back then it was a purer form of man and machine against man and machine. And I guess, to me, motorsports, especially Formula One, is really a lot like modern knights jousting. It's a real battle. And, when you get all the technology in there, it kind of takes away a lot of that. That's the period that I really thought was fantastic, was all these guys who, once, they had the support of the team in practice and qualifying. They had all the, everything they needed, tires, unlimited tires many times. They'd run extremely light in qualifying. But once the race, once they pulled out onto the track and did their formation lap, when that green flag dropped, they were on their own for the duration of the race. And I think that was fantastic.
Wow. That sounds, I'm actually getting a little emotional, because that sounds so freeing and so amazing, like to be able to, as you said, the man against the machine. That's, I know, almost romantic, I guess, is the way that as I listen to you say that, describe that era. Are those the years that you were racing, or is that the years that you were reading the road and track?
Those were the years when I was trying to get into the sport, and I was getting through college and being poor and all of those things. So it was interest. When I got married and we moved in together, my wife said, "What are all these magazines under the bed?" I said, "Those are my racing magazines. You don't touch those." So I was very interested, but very uninvolved, other than emotionally and intellectually just following the sport.
Well, I think it's so great to hear this, because especially for people who are new to the sport here in the US, because F1, it's expanded its audience. I think some people, their understanding may be characterized by a specific media that they've seen. Maybe it's the Instagram, maybe it's Facebook or ESPN Sports. And then of course there's Drive to Survive. Do you think that this is a moment in the sun for F1 inside of America, or do you think it's a substantial shift? Do you think people will have that same type of love that you're expressing for the sport?
Well, I think it depends on two things. One, it depends on the sport itself producing an ongoing series of events that remain interesting but develop their own traditions. So for instance, you have the flavor and character of Monaco. I mean, you have the flavor and character of Spa. You have the flavor and character now of the US Grand Prix. So they don't have to be the same. In fact, I think it's better if they have their own character, so that each one is sort of a significant standalone event. But it also depends on the fans and whether they develop a real strong tie to particular teams, particular drivers, and if their love for the sport then becomes a real passion instead of just a curiosity. A lot of the people go to the races because they're curious, but it takes a hardcore person to remain a fan year after year. When your team is not doing well, and you stick with them, and you cheer them on when they make a little breakthrough and you follow them. That's the kind of thing that we'll have to have. And I think Americans like underdogs enough that there's always an underdog in Formula One. So there's a real possibility that if the sport appeals to the people who can get behind and really support an underdog, then I think you could have it. People are always going to be attracted to Ferrari. It's just one of the grandees of the sport. And and it's a very sexy thing, Ferrari and racing Ferrari and handsome Ferrari drivers and that sort of thing. It's, Ferrari's always going to have supporters, but are people going to get behind a Williams when they, have had 5, 6, 7, 8 years of tough luck? Are they going to stick with them and really pull for them? Are we going to get an American team? Are we going to get Americans to be regularly in Formula One? And will Americans follow the American and support him, kind of like the Netherlands does Max? Or will they find somebody that they love and are supportive of, like Alonso or Max or whomever?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, to be determined. I think it's still
Very
too
much.
early, in my opinion. So for any of these new fans, what do you think is critical viewing? Is there old videos that we can probably find on YouTube, or books, magazines? You mentioned Road and Track. I don't know if that's the one you'd say, but in order to understand the sport.
Well, it's easier than ever to learn about the sport. That's one of the wonderful things about it, and one of the reasons that I'm optimistic about its longevity. But online there are many, many news sites that follow F1. There are podcasts like the one we have now that follow F1. There are magazines that you can subscribe to, like Autosport, which is a British journal that covers motorsports generally and Formula One particularly. There are technical journals like Race Car Engineering and others like that you can learn a lot about the technology and the engineering behind it. It's a very fascinating area for STEM oriented students, and I think it's a promising area for education if schools can get on it. I know that University of North Carolina has a motorsports program. So there are magazines, the television, YouTube is fantastic. It has a lot. Some of the quality is not so great, but you can go back and see races of the 70s and 80s and 90s, and there's some really good races in there.
Well, and I guess that would also, in the audience aspect of it, boys and girls could watch and enjoy and find a spot inside the world of F1. It's not just the racing, it's even the engineering or strategy, the technical marketing, all those different things are all options for anybody who loves the sport, that maybe now more than ever, it doesn't really matter where you came from. If you have a love and you want to study and you want to enjoy it and work, you can be a part of that world.
Oh yeah, some of the brightest people in F1 now, and the brightest people on their way up in the sport are females, and I think there's a good reason for that. And I think that the field is wide open for women in the sport, not just to be fans, but to actually be engaged in and involved in. And there are programs trying to push drivers up, female drivers into Formula One. I'm not too optimistic about that. It would be nice, and I would like it if a female was able to be competitive in Formula One. But I think that there are some physiological things that make it very, very, very difficult. Not to say that there's not a woman out there somewhere who could do it and will do it. We've certainly had 3 women at least in Formula One in the past, right. But it's just, you are talking about 20 seats in a very, very, very exclusive sport. And, there's for every one of those guys, there's 10,000 guys who would like to aspire to that. Right. So for a woman to rise through all of that opposition is going to be a real challenge. And hats off to her. I'll be her biggest fan if and when we get somebody like that.
That's right. I know that for sure. And I mean, even kind of parallels with Americans trying to get in. Like, it's a long road to get there. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, those early decisions and not knowing if it's going to lead to one of those 20 seats. So any person who's going to decide man or woman, they have a long road ahead of them with truly no guarantee. The deck has to really fall in the right way. So
Yeah.
let me ask you this question then. You kind of alluded to it. We started this podcast and really this was your vision. Why did you think we needed to launch this podcast?
Well, I think you're the reason that I felt like it was important. And
Oh,
there are a lot of people like you who are smart people who are interested in Formula One, and they're not just casual fans. They don't think it's just about fast cars. They appreciate that there's more to it. And so I feel like there are a lot of podcasts out there, but most of them are either garbage and are really don't know what they're talking about, or they're very technical and they're speaking to a very, very well-informed audience. And I kind of thought there's a niche in there for that person, the person who's gotten interested in Formula One and is just trying to learn more about it and really decide whether this is their sport, if they really want to get involved in it, and just to know more about it.
so I'm translating that to Sabrina was already asking these questions. Might as well record it and get Dick to be a part of it. And maybe we can see if other people want to hear all of the questions she's got. That's what I just heard.
There you go.
So what do you hope the listeners will take away from this podcast? I mean, because I may be the prototype, but there are other people out there. What do you hope people listening will glean from this?
Well, I hope that between you and your excellent questions and Dick and his vast knowledge and involvement with the sport and my own, that we can provide a ramp, an on-ramp, and help people better understand the sport and the various aspects of it, help them to see more about it. That's really the case. I mentioned my friend Chuck Jones, who was a former Formula One team owner with Ensign Formula team with Mo Nunn. He really did that for me when I was actually racing. I met him when I first started racing at a professional level, and he really did that for me. He taught me a lot of stuff that I was unaware of that was really helpful. About the politics of the sport and about the people in the sport, and just the formation of teams and drivers and all the stuff in between.
Okay, well, that kind of answers the question that I was going to ask is, out of all the people that you've got in your network, I can't imagine I'm the only person that is experiencing a desire to learn about Formula One. And then Dick, you have chosen him to be on the podcast, and he's one of many people I know inside the Formula One world. Why did you choose this specific combination for the conversation?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is I think your questions are really, really good questions, both from the standpoint of the way that you ask them, the way you form them, and also the subjects that you're trying to learn about. And you tend to see, because of the way your mind works, you tend to see that there's a surface level and there's something underneath the surface, and you have a good idea about how to ask that question, form that question in a way that goes to it. And so that's why I think you should be involved in it. Dick and I are partners in another effort to try and bring Americans into Formula One. But Dick it's a very interesting history. We used to race at the same racetracks on the same weekend in different classes, and we never knew each other until my friend Chuck Jones' son, who is a mutual friend of ours, introduced the two of us. And he lived in California at the time. So Dick and I lived within 40 or 50 miles of each other and never knew each other, even though we were at the same racetracks for all this time. But Dick is a very smart guy, and he's very experienced in motorsports. He's run his own car. He's run his own teams. He's worked for really good teams here in the States. And so he has a good technical background, and he understands a lot of the other aspects of motorsports, like the politics and the technology and things like that.
Wow. Well, I have to say, I am so grateful you've invited me. And I've also enjoyed getting to know Dick and hearing his perspective. And I look forward to actually doing a conversation similar to this one with him to hear his backstory. I think the audience would enjoy that. So let me ask you this: outside of the obvious of the Drive to Survive mania that we see, what do you think is necessary to get Americans involved, like to help them understand the sport? We've kind of, I think, danced around it, but like if someone who has gotten to this point in the conversation is thinking, okay, I really like what they're saying, I want to do this, I want to either be involved, maybe they want to follow your example and go to a race, is there a specific type of racing that they should go start watching, try to start driving in? Like how do you enter into this world, I guess, is the question I'm trying to see.
You roll up your sleeves and go get involved. It's easier than ever to do this now. We have 3 American Grand Prix. That makes it easy to go see the top level. There are other races. There's go-karting that is really, really spectacularly competitive. And a lot of areas. I mean, the Dallas area has 2 really, really world-class go-karting tracks. In Texas, there's probably 5 or 6 really high-class karting tracks. So you can go and watch those. You can get involved with people. You can offer to help racing teams, individuals who are racing. There's autocross, which is not my thing, but it's an area where a person can learn more. And if you want to get hands-on, it's a way to do it. A lot of people are discovering motorsports through karting with their kids, and that's where the hope for the future in terms of Americans in Formula One really lies, is in our young people. And I'm talking really young, 11 to 14, 15 is really the place where I think the action is going to be.
So when you say help, meaning like go and volunteer to help someone who's wanting to be a karter?
Yeah, there's always something to do on a cotton picking car or race car of any kind. So if you want to get involved in road racing, find out somebody who's a team that's located in your area and offer to do anything. You can offer to put air in the tires. You can offer to wash the car off. You can put stickers on the car. And what happens over time with those things is if you show interest and you show initiative, you show some level of expertise, then you'll get invited in, whether, whatever area it is that you have capacity in. One of the areas that a lot of drivers would kill to have somebody in their network for is somebody who's really capable on the computer of analyzing data, because the data systems are fantastic now. I just went to my grandson's kart race, and he has a new data acquisition system on his kart. And his father and I were looking at that, analyzing it, going, holy cow, we are now seeing exactly, he's 9 years old, and he can't tell us what he's feeling and knowing, all of the time. But now we have data, and we can look at it. And, if we had a computer whiz kid like my other son, Daniel, then we might actually even understand it even quicker. So there's just no end to what a person can do. If you're good in business, you could offer to run the business and look for sponsorship. There's just no end to what somebody who is trying to go forward in this. I can tell you from having run my own car and from running teams, there's just about enough work to fill the hours in the day.
Wow. I'm just thinking about kids who are in high school who are needing like volunteer work, this would be great for them to learn from, especially when you talk back to the STEM aspect of it, teachers who are wanting to get the kids outside of the school walls, outside literally, or even I guess you could do indoor karting too, but that could be applying a lot of this into a real world situation. Teamwork, I think, would be great for kids to learn. It seems like that, and civility to one another could all come, and also competitiveness, how to be a good sportsman.
Yep.
Those would all, and then that would just be from the education perspective, but let alone like a person who is doing an engineering degree, who has a love for sports, coming in and volunteering and doing an internship or something like that. And then of course the business, as you said, I think I'd glazed over that and thought, what could I do, if I were much younger and starting this journey? But that's really exciting to think of all the opportunities. So, but then let's zero in specifically. If you were just mentioning your grandson, if you're a parent, you're watching the sport, your kid's enthusiastic about it, watching it, you put them in a cart and they look like they're doing good, you're analyzing the data and you're watching them. What should a person or a family that wants to support a young driver be thinking? How, especially here in America, how do they start that process? What should they be mindful of? Like problems or swindles that I would imagine could happen in the process?
Well, the biggest, it's a small community, so the swindlers and the crooks get weeded out pretty quickly.
That's good to know.
Yep. And they're not many, to be honest. The people in motorsports are really good people, for the most part, and they will help you. So it depends on the goal. If the goal is to try and get to Formula One, you got to have a completely separate conversation, because that's a very, very difficult pathway. But if the goal is to figure out if this kid has any talent, if this kid is interested, the way to kind of get started in that is to go to the local karting club and have a look, just see if the kid is interested. And you can still get into the same kind of thing as Pee Wee baseball and soccer and all that, where the parent is driving the bus. And you gotta, this is a serious enough thing that the kid has to want to do it. So there are ways to, to pass the responsibility on to the kids so that they're really doing it. But you go to a kart track, you maybe rent a kart for a period, or you get a team of people to run a kart for you. But you got to be prepared to spend some money, because a real racing go-kart, probably the minimum level you can get into a new one for is at least $5,000 and maybe as much as 10, depending on what you're doing. You can buy used equipment, but used equipment comes with the usual sorts of caveats, and there's good equipment, there's not so good equipment, and you have to just know, you have to educate yourself to know what you're buying, and then get in there and start doing it. My grandson's kart track runs kids down as young as about 4 or 5 years old. I'm not a big advocate for 4 and 5 years old, but they do that. He's 9 and he's been racing a year now. That's a good age. But again, the goal is kind of the thing. Do you want to go road course racing? Do you want to go NASCAR racing? Do you want to go dirt track racing? Do you want, there are people who actually make their living professionally driving go-karts. Jan Halen is a Belgian guy who lives in Florida. It's a friend of mine. From the age of 15, he moved from Belgium to Italy and was a paid professional go-karting driver for the next 5, 6, 7 years for one of the factories there in Italy. So that's how serious it can get. But it starts at the local club, and see if there's interest, see if there's talent. If your kid doesn't have talent and he doesn't have interest, there's no way you should spend $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000 just to get into something, and then then probably a couple of $1,000s a year just running them, tires and gas and entry fees and stuff like that.
Yeah, because I think that that's important, especially as young kids or as parents become aware. This is different than like the NFL world and the cost of that. Um, and it just seems that you need to go in with your eyes open
Yep.
to what you're putting yourself or the child into. Okay. So that I think is a good, at least brief discussion. I know that you could give a lot more instructions and guidance. That's one of the many things I really appreciate about you, that I have benefited from personally. And I'm that's why I'm so excited about the podcast. I think a lot of people should hear your thoughts,
Well,
because they are profound.
let me say just one other thing that
Oh,
I
sure.
didn't discuss, and that is if an adult wants to get involved in motorsports, that's a fantastic thing too. And there are lots of ways they can do that too. The Sports Car Club of America, there are driving clubs, sort of country club type of organizations that own a racetrack, and you can become a member of that. And you can go out there and just do a high performance driving day and see if you like it. They're professional instructors, and it's a relatively inexpensive way, and you can do it in your street car. So that's a way adults can get involved and find out what it's really like to get, like I did, out from behind the fence and get on the track.
Okay, wait. Now I got two follow-up questions to that. One, what does adult mean? Like, what is the age that when you're saying that? And is there a too old for that?
I don't think there's too old. Adult, one of the places to start these is Porsche and BMW and some of the other car companies give driver education days. So they're high performance driving courses for kids who are just learning to drive.
Mhm.
And that's a really great thing for your kid. It helps teach them things that will protect them when they're driving on the street. So I really recommend to parents that they take their children to one of these performance days that BMW, Porsche, and some of the others put on to learn under the care of a professional instructor who's not their parent, and learn what it feels like to push a car to the edge where you spin it. And it just makes them safer on things. So age 16, 17 up is adult. And I just don't know whether you can be too old.
And do you have to be able to drive a manual or can you drive an automatic?
More and more, it's just done in automatics. The high performance days for kids. Really and truly, when you move into racing or high performance driving days, you can drive an automatic, but you're probably going to want to drive a gear shift car.
Okay, yeah. I wondered about that because I feel like more and more of us, and I'm one of those, are people who just know how to drive an automatic, and that if that is a barrier to doing that. My final question for you is, who are your racing inspirations and why?
Well, one of the early ones was Graham Hill,
Hmm.
and he was just a gentleman. He was a British guy. He was handsome. I had a mustache and was a real talented driver. He became a world champion. His helmet was interesting because it was black with white bars vertically situated around it, and that harkened back to his days rowing crew at university. So that was kind of interesting and kind of caught my attention. He later went on, after driving, he went on and owned his own team. He was a privateer. And so he was an inspiration early on. He was a 70s and 80s era driver. Gilles Villeneuve, though, is the guy who really caught my attention. He raced snowmobiles growing up, and then he raced Formula Atlantic, which I really was interested in, was American Series, and European drivers who were going through the ranks coming up to F1 would come and race in the United States in Formula Atlantic. And so I watched him, and I just was fascinated by him. He was incredibly talented. Went into F1 very quickly, went to Ferrari, drove with incredible passion, and you could just see it. And it was just a spectacular thing to watch. He just was completely committed to wringing the car out and getting everything out of it. So he was probably the most influential. I met Jacques Villeneuve when I went to the driving school in France. That was pretty spectacular. Keke
Wow.
Rosberg.
Wow.
I met Philippe Alliot and Frank Williams as a team owner
Really?
here in Dallas at the race. So, those were pretty spectacular and special people. But one of the other people that has inspired me a great deal is a guy named Rob Wilson. And Rob is not somebody that a lot of people know, but Rob is originally from New Zealand and moved to England early on, was a Formula 3 driver, and was actually moving into Formula 1, but got kicked out because he didn't have the money. He had the talent, didn't have the money, and Nelson Piquet basically brought money, and he lost his F1 drive, literally on the grid.
Wow.
But he became a driver coach, and he still coaches and has coached a number. I mean, he coached Kimi Räikkönen. He coaches several of the Formula 1 drivers now.
Oh,
And
wow.
he understands how to communicate, how to become a much better racing driver. He is incredibly talented at that. There's one other thing I would say, that is, I really do think it's possible for an American to become an F1 driver. But as I said earlier, it's a really difficult, very challenging, and it's almost impossible to do alone. And so that's why we are trying to get organized and started a competition, basically, that looks for talent. It's a talent search, looking for talent and trying then to support that talent to get them prepared take them through the necessary steps, keep them here in the US until they're about 15 or 16. And then if they're talented enough, take them to Europe and get them involved in car racing there. We'll use kart racing here, car racing in Europe, and put them on the ladder to get to F1. That's something I believe can be done, but it's very, very expensive. It's very challenging. We're trying to make it where it's meritorious rather than money driven. And that's a big challenge for us, but that's our challenge and what we're trying to do.
Well, I think that would be a good conversation for us to have in another time where you share more about that.
Yeah, I'd be delighted to do that.
This has been a wonderful conversation. I can't tell you. Thank you enough for opening up and letting us hear your story and your thoughts about where F1 is today, both here in the US and where it has been around the world and where it is hopefully going. This has been great. I look forward to more conversations with you.
Thank you, Sabrina. I appreciate it. And I appreciate all your good questions.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysaGirlandF1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in, because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.